Good evening. Over the course of a week, spent out the book of Ecclesiastes. Wednesday of last week, we talked about the first couple of chapters, and then on Sunday, we talked a bit more, and tonight we are going to conclude our discussion on the book of Ecclesiastes. Next week, we will be looking at the Song of Solomon. And with that, we'll conclude what we have been talking about in the wisdom literature. So you have enjoyed it and gained a bit from it. And as we wrap up, then we'll move on to something else. So tonight, we are continuing actually with what we had started on Sunday. We ran into a bit of a time constraint Sunday morning, so we've got to look at a couple of more things here before we go on to what we'll finish with. We were talking on Sunday about some examples or some illustrations, if you want to call it that, of vanity on earth. We talked about the word vanity, and what did we come to conclude that the word vanity meant?
The Hebrew word there means breath or vapor, kind of like it's proof and gone, or no true meaning.
Empty. And you think both of those work well? If something's empty, you know what it's like to open a box or go into a room and it be empty. The same with a breath or a vapor, especially when it's cold weather. You walk outside and you breathe and you see, and there's a whole lot right there, but then it's gone really quick, right? And you can't corral that. You can't capture that either. So when we think about the vanity of things, we looked at sort of the futility of earthly endeavor, the idea of acquiring as much wealth as we possibly can, the highest position. We read how that when he said when he had achieved that point, then there would be a second person that would come on and achieve that a little bit later. We talked about vanity even in religion, how that it can be empty as well with that. And so all of these are examples, and we're going to go a little further here this evening with a couple more of those. And for this one, this is Ecclesiastes chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. And the question that's going to pose, and we'll do it just like we did, the question will pop up there in a second, but the possession of wealth without the enjoyment of it, for the vanity of that. So let's look at this, Ecclesiastes 6, verses 1 through 6. Tom, do you care to read this, and it'll roll over to another page?
Not satisfied with good. For indeed, I say that fear one child there is peace, for it comes from vanity and departs from darkness, and its name is over the darkness. Though it has not seen the sun or known anything, this has more rest than that man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice. It has not seen good. Do not all go to one place.
So I want us to think about maybe the question here is perhaps wealth without enjoyment, but maybe a better word here is just almost life without enjoyment of it. Might be a better approach for it. So I want you to consider that for just a second. How would you describe what we read here? This possession of wealth, the possession of life, the possession of family, whatever you want to fill in here, without enjoying it. Do you know anybody who seems to have it made, as it were, but you can fill in how you want to, but they don't seem to enjoy what they have?
This part puts me in mind of Job, where he said, you know, it would have been better for me. I wish I'd died in my mother's sorrow, pain that I'm having to go through now. God was except for talking about not just the season, but for the whole life. If you don't have joy, there's no point.
Yeah. Others, the lack of enjoyment. So if we find ourselves in a position where we don't seem to enjoy whatever it is, how do we remedy that? Huh? Now, if you're finding yourself in a situation where you don't have joy or you're not enjoying your life or whatever it is, how do we remedy that? Okay. So maybe we need to be mindful of who we spend our time with. You've heard the term Debbie Downer, right? If you spend all your time with somebody who is a Debbie Downer, what will you be? Kind of the same, right? You know, if the glass is half empty or the half full, if you're always the half empty person that you're with, then it's going to pull you down a bit as well. What else? Being around people. Go ahead. Say it again. Uh-huh. So an honest prayer, writing yourself with God, as it were. Okay. Yeah. Mary. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. About 160 years ago now, so it's
People get happiness and joy mixed up.
yes.
And happiness comes and goes. You can't make yourself happy all the time, but you can make yourself joyous. I think the only two things you can change is your attitude and your environment.
Mm-hmm.
If you find yourself where you have no joy in life,
Mm-hmm.
change your attitude or change your environment.
I'm glad Ben said environment because that's something I was actually thinking about. Um, I think sometimes we tether ourselves to something and say, well, I have to do this. It might be a job. I think all of us have probably had jobs that we enjoyed, and we've probably had jobs that we didn't really enjoy. And it might be that we find ourselves and we say, boy, life is just miserable, but it's the job is what's miserable. It's like, well, I can't quit. Well, I don't know if we can or not. Everybody's situation is different, and I understand that. But sometimes the places where we put ourselves that can sort of bring us down or boost us up, or perhaps it might be. So, why can't we quit the job? Well, because it's paying for what I've got. Well, that's what Tom said a minute ago about we're just continuing to seek out more of it. And so joy, I like what Mary said there a minute ago. It is a choice. And Ben, you don't have a lot of things that you can control, but those are some things that you can. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Mm-hmm. And to go along with that, I can't answer that question for you. So what Sue Ann just said there is we have to be content. We have to find that I mean, I guess you could come and ask me for advice, but I'm not living your life. I'm not in your situation. And the answer to you and the answer to Johnny might be completely different. But we have to strive for enjoyment. What if we don't have enjoyment in our life?
After they die, it's like a kid. A kid has nothing, he has no possession. You'll never see a more joyous thing. When I was growing up, I grew up on the poor side, but I was as happy to be. We was out there having corn cob fights and everything else. I had joy because I chose to it.
Yeah. Mhm. And Paul's a good example for us of somebody who went through certainly some highs and lows and hung around with the bad crowd, hung around with the good crowd, and spent a lot of time learning, but spent a lot of time teaching, all of those kinds of things, but content in whatever state we're in. What we just read here in verse 6, even if he lives 1,000 years twice, but has not seen goodness, does not all go to one place. And you know, 1,000 years twice is a nice literary way of describing something. You know, we would probably say if I lived to be 1,000,000 years old, right, or something like that. But you know, it would be sad to think that we got to the end of the line, whatever our end of the line is, and somebody said, "Tell me your 3 most enjoyable things in life." If you couldn't list it, it'd be tough, right? But I'm sure there are people have been mentioned it Sunday or maybe last Wednesday that the Rockefeller man who said on his deathbed he'd like to live long enough to make another $1,000,000. Well, I don't know if that's a true story or not, but it's a mindset that I think a lot of people probably do have, right? And it would be shameful that we don't have any enjoyment uh, within our lives. Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Sure. So it leads into what we're going to see here in the second one. This is Ecclesiastes 6. It's really just a continuation of what we had just read a moment ago. Tony, do you care to read Ecclesiastes 6, verses 7 through 9? And we see the graphing there that did a moment ago. We see that mentioned, and that's come up several times here. And so, how does the author here treat the sort of insatiability of human desire? What does it mean to be insatiable, first of all? Not satisfied. You're never satisfied with whatever it is. Mhm. Yeah. It is all there a little bit, but our insatiability, the inability to feed whatever it is, can get beyond us, right? Like it can be, it's almost something that we can't control, perhaps as it was. For some people, it might be working. You mentioned the example there a minute ago. They can't control it. For some, it might be accumulation of stuff, or it might be some actions or sins or whatever it might would be. But it is an unquenchable fire to take that, and so. Mhm.
Your kids see you, if you grow up with a workaholic, and you're either going to, same way with alcohol, if you grow up with two things, you're either going to hate alcohol with every fiber in your being, or you're going to grow up to be one.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with this. If you're a workaholic, don't sit down with your family and kids. You're showing your kid that's what matters most in life. That's what they're going to do.
Verse 7 there, what Tony read just at the beginning, it said, all the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the soul is not satisfied. And Mom, you said a minute ago about a need of God. There needs to be something, right? There has to be something that sort of fills that in, and that work can be insatiable. But sometimes you hear the phrase or the saying, let go and let God. I'm sure you've heard that before. And that's 7 or 8 words, but that can sometimes fill the void far better than any other reckless pursuit of something else along the way. Let's go to the This is sort of the last one of these, and then we'll go a little bit further with some other things. But this is Ecclesiastes 6:10 through 12 to finish this. Linda Denham, you care to read this one? Ecclesiastes 6:10 to 12. So I think it's important for us to recognize our limitations. And this is difficult, right? Why is it hard for us to recognize our limitations? Mhm. And it's not even think, but sometimes we're told that we can do anything. And I don't, that's slightly different, but you're exactly right. What? Mm-hmm.
We don't want to admit our weaknesses and frailties and our dependence on others. Especially the older you get, it's harder for men and probably women too, I guess. It's hard to admit I can't do what I used to.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to learn to either change the way I do it or not do as much as I used to.
Shorty, you and I were talking about that a minute ago. She said she folded through 4 bags of clothes, and she said, my thumb is hurting real bad, you know? Well, that 4 bags of clothes, I could fold 4 shirts and my thumb's hurting, you know? So 4 bags. But you know, there was a time 50 years ago we could fold 8 bags maybe, but we all have limitations. But you're feeling it today or this evening, aren't you? And so when we think about our limitations, we have to, first of all, recognize those, right? We have to recognize uh, what those are. And then we have to live. Now, that, again, as we talked about in this series, that does not necessarily mean that it has to be a sort of a negative approach to it. We can't say, well, I'm limited, so I can't do anything. And there are people that will sometimes quit on life. And that's going in the total opposite direction. But there are times when we have to recognize what our limitations are. Thoughts on it before we move forward? What we see here, go ahead.
I'll say it. I've learned to be like Paul. It's when I'm at my weakest that I'm at my strong.
All right.
When I realize my limitations of what I can't do, I lean on God more.
Okay.
Trust on God more. That makes me better.
Others. Tom's mentioned a pride there. We've had 6 chapters worth of verses that told us we don't need to do that. But even still, on verse 12 at the end of chapter 6, we're still going back to that, saying, I can do that. The vanity is revealed itself once again. Go ahead. Uh-huh. Right. Right. Uh-huh. Right. Uh-huh. Sure. Right. Anyone else? So all good stuff. This was all stuff that we were going to try and finish on Sunday, and we weren't able to. So let's go a little further. It's going to be kind of rapid fire the last little bit here as we go through the back half of the book of Ecclesiastes. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 7. This is the length of it. So, Dad, I'm going to ask you to read this, and it's a few. It's 2 or 3 slides, I think. So.
patient spirit is better than a proud spirit. Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for I am through the rest of the book above. Do not say, why would a woman is better than me? For you do not inquire wisely concerning me. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and profitable those who see the sun. For wisdom is the defense as money is the defense, but the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what is made crooked? In the day of prosperity and joy, but in the day of adversity consider. Surely God has appointed the one as well as the other. We find out nothing that will come after him.
So these three comparisons that were there at the beginning. I want to go through each of these real quick. The first one that we see, that a good name is better than precious ointment. Why is that? Okay, why is that better? We've got two things. Why is a good name better than precious ointment? Okay.
Like I told the guys, boys, and classmates, there's only two things you really will ever own in your life. Everything else can come and go, and be taken away from you throughout the day. The only thing that you got that was yours and will be yours forever is your reputation and your name.
Others with the precious ointment. When I think about that, I think about the story where they have the woman comes and she breaks the alabaster flask of the oil, and I don't know what the worth was, but it was worth a lot. And do you remember who got a little bit worked up about that? Who fussed about it? Judas did, right? Judas said, we shouldn't have done that, I mean, we think we could have sold, could have done whatever. But why did that action move Jesus? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they showed reverence to him there, as it were. So this ointment, it would have been there forever, and I guess whatever bowl or flask, whatever it was in, but if it was never used, what would have happened? I saw something, it's been a while back, and Boo, I'm sure you've seen something similar to wine bottles from the time of the Romans, 2,000 years old. And they've been stored away. And you think about, I don't really know how wine is made, but the amount of work that went into that, and nobody ever experienced it, right? There's a lot of work, no reward there, as it were. We think about something like this, these things that are viewed as precious. Whoever it was that made that wine 2,000 years ago is long since gone to the grave, right? But the name of us would be more important. The second one that we read there, why is it better to go into the house of mourning than into the house of feasting? This one was tougher. I think so. Just living it up all the time. Uh-huh. What else on the house of mourning versus house of feasting?
The house of mourning calls you to be sober, to introspective, to commune with God, to depend on God. When you're hurting, that's when people turn to God.
Mm-hmm.
People mourn and they turn to God. I think that's why mourning is better, because when you're partying and celebrating, you're not minding on God. When you're mourning, you're really minding very focused on.
The third one was, why is it better? Sorrow is better than laughter. It's kind of the same thing, but that I would venture to say that most of us would much rather be laughing than we would be sorrowful. If you give the choice of what movie are we going to watch tonight, we're going to watch a movie that makes us laugh or a movie that makes us cry. We're probably going to pick the one that makes us laugh. I talked to somebody, me and a friend of mine, we were talking about movies, and we said, there's some movies that you can watch them once, but you can't watch them any more than once, right? It's too much. But there are some movies that are, that you can laugh with and you can watch them. How many of you have seen probably every episode of Andy Griffith 100 times, right? You already know what's going to happen before it happens. But you're probably laughing before he even says what he's about to say. But why do you keep watching it, right? It's enjoyable, right? It's entertaining. And so for most of us, we would probably say, well, laughter is better than sorrow. So what does he mean here that sorrow is better than laughter? Nobody wants it. Go to verse 6 right here. Verse 6, it says, for like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. But this is also vanity. I don't know. I found it kind of interesting right there. That the thorns that are under the pot, as it were. But that pot is being heated, right? What will eventually happen to those thorns? They're gone, right? They're not going to last there at all. You have to throw another log on the fire, as it were. And so those good times will go quick. We can learn, as you see, kind of what you said a minute ago, from those times in mourning, those times of difficulty. Of what value is wisdom? And I want us to look at verses 13 and 14. Why is it a complete understanding out of our reach? Let's answer the first question. What value is wisdom? Okay. Prevents us from making mistakes. Help us to make better choices. Sure. So why then, according to verses 13 and 14, is a complete understanding beyond our reach?
Their minds are flesh, and they can only think of fleshly things. I mean, as much as we try to be spiritual, we can't understand that. We're not going to wrap our minds around the power of God, around the way He perceives time and the way He created things. I forget that.
So our pursuit then, I guess, of wisdom, is it wrong to pursue wisdom? Not at all. But is there a finish line to the pursuit of wisdom? I don't think there can be, right? Because if there was a finish line implies what? At the end of the race, when you've ran 5 kilometers, you don't have to run any further. Every now and then I watch horse racing and I get tickled at when they cross the finish line, they just keep on running, right? As long as you can stop, you don't have to run anymore. But I mean, they're wound up. That's how it is. But when the finish line is over, that's it. But when we're pursuing wisdom, there is no way to accumulate all the wisdom. So again, it's not to say don't do it, because certainly it's valuable. But it's also unrealistic to think we'll be able to ever corral all the wisdom that there is. And we can't let that then be a deterrent or a distressor for us, but make the best decisions with the information perhaps that we have.
I know everything there is to know about it.
Yep.
When you say that, or when you allow yourself, you're done. You're not going to get any wiser.
Yep.
I don't care how much you know about the subject, there's always
We've seen that fill in the blank, whatever it is, over the last several verses. Let's skip ahead. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 27 through 29. Mary, do you care to read this one? Of the word right here. Anything in British English, the term scheme is always used to talk about like some kind of program or something. We use the word scheme in America different. Scheme has a very negative connotation in America. It's not negative in British English, but I think that here it kind of works it out to use both of them. That God has made upright. They have sought out many schemes. Trying to do it right, we can pretty easily sort of do it wrong, right? Or we can say we can look for a quick way around there's where I just sort of answered the question, so I apologize for it. But I wanted to say that right there. When you think of somebody scheming, Connie, what comes to mind when someone is scheming? Trying to get around what's right. How can I do this as easy as possible, or without getting in trouble, or whatever it was? Do we do that as Christians? Of course. Should we do that as Christians? Not to give away the story, but on Sunday morning we're going to talk about Nadab and Abihu. Ben talked about it last Sunday, so I felt like I need to get in there and talk about it as well. But you will remember they made strange fire, right? Well, I don't want to talk any more about it than that, but they were trying to sort of get around it, as it were. And we do the same thing as well. Let's go on to Ecclesiastes. This is it's the end of chapter 8. It's like 2 verses at the end of chapter 8, and then the first verse of chapter 9. Maria, do you care to read this one? If you look on the screen, it'll be another slide as well. So, what are 2 points from those verses? So you might want to have your Bible handy because I just jumped away. But what are 2 points that a wise person has to realize with regard to the work of God? Yeah, it's unknowable for us. We can maybe sort of kind of grasp it a little bit, right? But it's truly unknowable for it. What else? We're quiet tonight. It's got 88 degrees for the first time all year, and we've shut down. I think what it is, we all had to park across the street, and we walked too far. We need to rest. That's what it is. We're just out of whack here tonight. Can we attempt to know God's ways? So let me re-ask it. Can we attempt to know God's ways? Yes. Can we be successful? Can that be difficult for us to attempt but not succeed? Of course it can. How many of you have ever said to another person, maybe a child, I am trying to figure out why you did this? Now, sometimes it might be something comical. Sometimes it might be something awful. But why are we trying to figure out why they did it? To better understand it. Yeah. So I'm thinking, though, more along the lines of like when we try to figure out why somebody did something, why a decision was made. I struggle with it and you struggle with it because you are only your own person. You know, like why does a 4-year-old get a pan and start banging it against the wall? I don't know. They do it though, don't they? They all try to make a little bit of noise. Why is it they're going to sling it all the way across? I don't know. It's hard to answer that, right? But why do we struggle answering that? So the last thing that I had written here was that neither work or study puts us as knowledgeable as God. And you could say, and you may have said this to your child, I can't figure it out. I don't know why you're doing this. You might just have to throw, well, we can be we're quick to throw in the towel on the coworker or on the kid or on the boss or whoever it is, but we just keep pursuing. Well, why did God do this, or why did God do that? I mentioned Sunday about baptism, and I firmly believe that baptism was made a task for Christians because it was a ritual that was understood and had been used by the Jewish people. Now, the sort of the historical evidence, the religious evidence, the scientific evidence, it all sort of points back. They were doing this before. Well, you've heard the saying, don't reinvent the wheel, right? Well, if you're already doing something that was meant to make you clean, well, it kind of made sense that they would use that for baptism, right? That is, I've made sort of peace with that. But I can't truly tell you why baptism washes away sins. I can tell why you're doing it as a ritual, but I'm not sure. I don't know why. Why can I not really tell you that? That's God's decision, right? It's not my decision. I've heard Dad say before, he said, I might have done it a different way. Yeah, probably all of us would have done it a different way. But we would have figured it out. We would have done it a way, kind of like what we were talking about a minute ago, Connie, with the schemes, right? We'd have figured out how can we do it a little bit differently. Well, everybody's different, but we can bog ourselves down so much with the whys of God that we're trying to pursue something that we'll never be able to figure out. And then we're just sort of, we're overwhelmed by it, and we've missed out perhaps on the joy, as we talked about a minute ago. How many of you have seen somebody baptized besides yourself? Is the first question that you thought of, why were they baptized? Or was it joy whenever they were baptized? What popped in your head first? The joy, right? It's easy to find that joy, right? But in the moment, maybe we experience the joy, but then later we're starting to question all this or that. Let's stay in the joy moment just a little bit longer. Mary. Uh-huh. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. No. That was girl told me that at work years ago. She's like, you just have to know. And I was like, I need to know why. You just have to know. It's like, that's just, you just got to know it. Don't ask why. You just got to know. And you all can probably relate as well. Let's go in a little further toward the end here. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 13 to 16. Right. Ecclesiastes 9, 13 to 16. Booty, care to read this one? Thank you. So the author here tells a story, and so I want you to think about, he saw 2 points with regards to wisdom in this story that he tells. He tells about this little city with few people, and this great comes against it, right? And so what happens then when the king comes? What does he do in verse 14? So he sieges it. So it takes over. He's come to dominate this city. It says there was found in it what kind of man? A poor wise man. This is a storytelling trope from the beginning of time, right? You've got the little man and the big man, the poor man and the rich man, the smart man and the dumb man. But when we're going to flip and see which one was which, perhaps. And by his wisdom, he delivered the city. And it says, yet no one what? No one remembered that same poor man. Then I said what in verse 16? Wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. In this story, which I'm sure it's not a real story, but it's a teaching method right there. But in this story, you would have thought, well, we're going to make a name of the man who did this, right? How many of you have seen the picture of those Marines raising the flag in Okinawa in World War II? Have you ever seen that picture before? It's 5 or 6 people. I think one of them was from Kentucky. Name them for me right now. So you're telling me vague descriptions of it, but we can't tell a name, right? But we could probably tell me who was president in World War II. And you can probably tell me who the general was that was in charge of the Pacific Theater in World War II. But which one did more to liberate the island? They did, absolutely. But their names long since, they'd have been completely forgotten if it wasn't for the picture. And I say that not in like a negative sense, but we talked earlier or the last time about like our pursuit of being the number one. And what is it? It's folly, right? There's, you know, it will easily be forgotten. And a lot of times the success of the poor man will be taken credit for by the rich man, even at that. So even when we figure it all out, we'll still sort of have it taken away from us there also. Right. Uh-huh. But there's been countless examples of things that sort of are like that as well. Let's finish up here because we're about out of time. Ecclesiastes 11. This is verses 1 through 8. Lucille, do you care to read Ecclesiastes 11, 1 through 8, dear? So, what view of life is taken in these 8 verses?
Forget all the what ifs and everything else and the worry and everything to death and cause you to be paralyzed. And you don't do nothing because you're worried about what might happen.
Others? Give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you know what evil will be on the earth. I think it's just, I think you just, I don't know. I'll throw it out to you all. What do you think? That's what I was thinking, like you put back a little bit. I don't know, that you would reserve. That's how I was thinking, but yours probably worked a little bit better right there as well. Uh-huh.
Cast your breath upon the water, water being nation. You know, just to help those that you
So, what does the writer recommend as how life should be approached? How should we approach life? Say it again. Let him rejoice. So I think if there's anything for us to take as a conclusion to this, is that we should spend more time rejoicing. It's not feasible to rejoice all the time. There are things that will always go wrong, constantly go wrong. But that being said, nonetheless, if we fret and worry only about the wrong and we lose out on time of rejoicing, then we are losing out on what precious good we do get to experience. And I hope that we can keep that in our minds as we go forward. I want to finish with one thing. I don't have any questions. I just want to finish with one last little bit. This is Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 9. And then, well, actually, I guess it's two things, but 11:9 through 12:1. We read, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these God will bring you into judgment. Therefore, remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. The days of your youth before the difficult days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them." Verses that I would imagine that we can all relate. I'm sure all of us have at some point thought, I'd like to go back, right? I'd like to do it a little bit differently, or I'd just like to go back and play another baseball game, or or go back to another time on the playground, or let's go back to grandma's house, or whoever it would be, right? But if we don't enjoy them, then it'll be nothing more than memories when it's over. Ecclesiastes 12:9 through 14. This is the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, and perhaps the best ending of any of the books that we have in the Bible. But we read, "And moreover, because the preacher, the teacher, Solomon, our author here, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs." And I think that answers for us that do we quit trying to learn? No, there's a curiosity that's there. Mary said it a minute ago that we do have to ask the question and look for the answer to the question. And we may never find the answer to the question, but we can't give up the look for it either. The preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright, words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. The commandment at the end is to fear God and keep his commandments. And it said, this is man's all. Not man's part, man's portion, but rather man's all. And I hope for us that we'll take that as our lesson here this evening as well. If there's anything we can do for you, any way we can help you, whatever it is, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.
Would you be free from the burden of sin?
together on this nice summer day. And at the end of this nice summer